Kia ora, and welcome to the Fertility New Zealand webinar series. At Fertility New Zealand, our vision is that everyone gets the support they need during their fertility experience. Kia ora koutou. I am Lydia Hemingway, and I am the CEO of Fertility New Zealand. Thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome, as I said again, to our webinar series. In tonight's webinar, Exploring Single Parenthood, Pathways, Donors and Support. Fertility New Zealand walks alongside all people facing fertility challenges, and we do this by providing support and information services and being the voice of this community through our advocacy work. I encourage you to jump onto our website and check out our services and connect with us on social media. Tonight, I am so pleased to introduce you to Andy Leggat and Rochelle Trail, who are our wonderful guest presenters, who are going to share insights on navigating fertility treatments, donor options, and key considerations for single parents. Andy is the Director of Psychology at Fertility Associates, as well as a board advisor here at Fertility New Zealand. Rochelle is a psychologist, as well as she's been a long-term facilitator of the Single Mothers by Choice support group in Auckland with Fertility New Zealand. Two incredible women who have joined us this evening. Both of them have such a wealth of knowledge in this area. So I'm really looking forward to everything they've got to share with us this evening. At the end, we'll have some time for questions. So pop them as you go into the chat anytime, and we'll go through them with Andy and Rochelle after the presentation. Over to you both now.
Hi all, I'm just going to introduce myself briefly, and then I am going to jump off and I'm going to reappear again in the second part. But I am, as introduced, I'm a single mother by choice myself, but I had my son 12 years ago. He's just had his 12th birthday. So my experience has become a little dated by now. So I'm also going to have a guest speaker that's going to help us understand a little bit more about pathways to finding donors outside of clinics. So that's what I'll be talking about a little bit later in the piece. But I'm going to hand over to Andy now, who's going to take us through the first part.
Thanks, Rochelle. Kia ora e te whānau. Ko Andy Leggat toka wingoa. I'm so pleased to be here tonight speaking to this community. And thank you, Lydia, for your beautiful introduction. I feel always so privileged to be involved with the ongoing support series and webinar series for Fertility New Zealand, sharing knowledge, really starting conversations. My focus tonight, and I should say it's really wonderful to be part of this collaborative effort as well. I love collaborative webinars and being able to work alongside Rochelle. I think that's a great way to do these. But my focus tonight, as Lydia said, I am based in one of the clinics here in New Zealand at Fertility Associates. So I'm going to swing my focus towards treatment through the clinics, what that pathway looks like, sharing some insights. The things that I wanted to cover off today are really exploring this pathway to parenthood and the differences in what it can mean for different people. There's a huge variety of presentations, and thinking about what it means to move into this if it's something that you're starting to explore, or potentially something that's been in your mind for a while and you may have even started this journey. Taking care of yourself through treatment. So when you are having assisted reproductive treatment through the clinics, what that actually looks like, and things to consider in terms of looking after your well-being, managing information needs, etc. Options for donors, and this is really looking at the pathways for personal donors versus using clinic donors, considerations that might be important for you when you're exploring the whole variety of options there, really with a child-centered approach thinking and the narrative with this. I thought I would touch briefly, I'm conscious of time, but touch briefly around embryo donation or using donor eggs in conjunction with donor sperm. I know it's a topic that is coming up a little more frequently for people wanting to know more about what that would look like and entail. I put understanding the legislative framework here, but I actually don't have a slide on it, but while I'm really happy to answer questions. And certainly donor conception linking and same donor family linking when you are working with a donor through the clinics, whether it be a personal donor, and I will explain what I mean by that in terms of personal and known donors maybe, and obviously with clinic donors, and then finding your community. And that is consistent regardless of what your pathway looks like. It's so important to be able to have your people around you, that shared narrative, the camaraderie that goes with this. So, I remember I've got to push the right button. Apologies. There we go. Okay. Look, my role at Fertility Associates, I have two hats that I wear really. One is working as a fertility counsellor, which means I have the absolute privilege of working with individuals as they explore various options of assisted reproductive treatment on their pathway to parenthood. And when I am working with single mothers, potential single mothers, exploring the option of parenthood through the use of donation, there is this varied approach to this presentation and the considerations that go into that. And one of those areas is whether this is a long existing plan and something that people have had many, many years to consider and feel really concrete and confirmed in what they're looking to do, and others where this has been a really significant shift of where they thought they would be, and potentially there may be some grief associated with this. And examples are where I may be working with women who have come out of relationships where they were potentially trying for a child together, and that relationship has ended, or women who, while initially perhaps had wanted to have a child with an intimate partner or a partner, actually that hasn't played out in perhaps what they had imagined. And so considering, well, actually, what are my feelings around single parenthood? How is this for me? Dipping my toes in the water, exploring this more, and a whole variety of emotions can present with this. And I put fear up here, potential anxiety, sometimes grief, and grief that sits in that altered pathway to parenthood of, while this wasn't where I actually thought I may be, the ultimate goal of becoming a parent, maybe becoming a mother, remains the same for me, but there is a grief that I'm working through when I explore this as an option. And one of the reasons I talk about this is I think sometimes when people are coming in to see me for counselling, there may be this expectation that they should come in fully adjusted to this pathway and with nothing but positive emotions and present this really upbeat front. But in actual fact, allowing that sense of vulnerability of, oh, this is actually really new and I'm apprehensive about it. And I know a bit, but I don't know it all. And I have a whole range of really human emotions, and being able to acknowledge that, I think, and that have that vulnerability actually allows counselling to be played out in a way that people get the most from it, as opposed to feeling going to counselling and I need to present a really good front. So being able to recognize that, as I say, this may be a shift for some, maybe not so much for others. Many can feel an absolute sense of empowerment of, I'm doing this myself and I feel really in control of this pathway, and I'm glad to be able to make this decision for me. So many different approaches. I put in here, managing responses from others. I think when making this decision, the community sometimes is very vocal about what their thoughts are. And so being able to share with others, you can be met with absolute support and love and warmth, and sometimes some conflicting questions that can even alter your own thinking about, oh, how do I feel about this? What does this mean? Am I okay with the options that I'm being presented with? So being able to talk with others, feeling really informed, doing your research, finding reputable sources where you can access information that feels trusted and reliable can be really helpful. Oh, again, not that button. Okay. Now, this slide is potentially a little bit earlier than it should be. Maybe I should put it later on in the piece, but taking care of yourself through treatment is something that actually needs to be at the front end all the way through. So maybe it is in the right place. I'm conscious that, working in the clinic where, look, I'll be very honest, if we think about clinics in a historical sense, it was often heterosexual couples, or certainly couples who were coming through. I'm talking about a very, very long time ago. And while we've come a long way since then, I think sometimes there are parts to the model of coming through the clinic where we don't recognize the particular challenges that single women, for instance, or single people may face coming through. And one of those is, coming to appointments potentially yourself, or the sense that you're supposed to come by yourself if you're coming for your medical appointment, or you're coming through for counseling, coming through for scans. And one of the things that is really consistent with fertility treatment is information. There is huge amounts of information and can often feel really bombarding. I've spoken to our clinics actually last year about patients' varying information needs and how we support patients, meeting them on their level and recognizing when it's too much or we need different models of information, working with people that actually allows you to process and retain information effectively. So as a single person thinking, actually, what do I need here? Is it possible that I might bring someone along to some of my appointments? How do I feel about that in terms of my privacy and this being my story? But actually, is it helpful to have a trusted person there who may be at my doctor's consult, or could be an extra person in counselling to be able to take on board all the information that comes along? Is there someone who I could debrief with after my sessions, or could pick me up and take me back when this is a lot to be going through? So things to think about. Preparing for procedures. It's treatment. Generally, there are many procedures that you'll undergo, from more minor things to having blood tests, to having egg collections potentially. So thinking about forecasting, who would I like to be in my support network? Who do I feel is a trusted individual that I want to bring along on this journey with me? And being able to prepare these things at the front end of treatment can be really helpful to allow you to feel a bit more secure, a bit more safe in what that pathway looks like. And the other thing in there is supporting with outcomes. And again, this is where I think maybe this slide is potentially a little bit early on in this piece. But, with fertility intervention, something that is really consistent is the uncertainty, and that through treatment there is absolutely no guarantee of a particular outcome. And as much as we work so hard towards our goal and enter into treatment with the understanding that we're working towards a child, an ongoing pregnancy and a baby, what that looks like, how long the duration of that treatment can be, is a really unknown, and it can bring a huge amount of uncertainty, sometimes a feeling of a sense of lack of control, and managing various challenging outcomes through that. So again, thinking about who's buffering me with this, who do I feel I can bring along with me that helps me with all of those things, with appointments, with working with medical professionals, with managing uncertainty, with managing the difficult outcomes that may come before you reach that ultimate outcome that you're working towards. Okay, donors. Now, that shift again, and for some it perhaps isn't a shift, but thinking about having a child with someone who is not an intimate partner. So having a baby where the other genetic contributor is not necessarily someone who you're in a relationship with. And one of the big questions that will come when I'm first meeting with people around thinking about single parenthood and donor conception is the options of a personal donor versus a clinic donor. And I don't think about this in terms of pros and cons, but actually very defined different implications that need to be considered. And many people will be exploring both of those options and may be saying, oh, look, there are people in my world who I've considered talking to about this, but I'm a little unsure. And in actual fact, maybe using a clinic donor feels more straightforward. So a couple of things here that people might consider. But ultimately, the main premise of all of this is when we're choosing a donor, thinking about this from the child's perspective and being child-led in whatever decision that you're making. And that might make more sense as I go on with this talk. But with our clinic donors, you might think, oh, this is someone that I don't have a pre-existing relationship with. And in that, you might think, actually, it feels like a real even keel to start with. I'm not navigating this pre-existing relationship and any changes in dynamic with that relationship, but I also don't know who they are. And again, when I talked about uncertainty, this is one of those areas, right? This is a huge decision to be making. And choosing someone who actually you've never met before can be really daunting and bring up a huge number of questions for people. Making a decision based on written information. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about the information that people actually are provided when they're choosing donors or clinic donors, but being provided with written information about genetic testing, around medical summaries with a donor's profile. Again, it's a big decision to be making when you feel like that information is finite at this point in time. I say this point in time because there's potentially options for that to grow in the future. So no prior in-person discussion with future contact, and this is a really significant one. All of our clinic donors, in part of their profile, ask questions around how open they are to future contact and what mechanism they would be happy for that to be in and what they hope that looks like. But there isn't necessarily that prior conversation that can allow people to feel that sense of certainty around this aligns with my beliefs and how I would like this to go in the future. And the other big one is considering family limits. So you may or may not know, but in New Zealand as a nation doesn't have a set family limit. However, the clinics do. So I can only speak for my clinic here. So the other two providers have their own limits. But Fertility Associates, the limit is 7 families. And that is across the country. So if someone had donated elsewhere, that would be factored into that 7 family limit. But sometimes a clinic donor who's going to donate to 7 families, that may feel very different to if you have a personal donor who has said to you that actually they're only donating to you because of the relationship that they have. And so perhaps there wouldn't be so many families that are connected. And some people will think about that family limit of 7 families as actually, I see that as really positive, and I would look forward to my future child being able to connect with other half siblings. Others can find it a little bit daunting, and again, not knowing who these individuals are and what it may be like to connect over their lifetime and certainly their child's lifetime. I'll talk a little bit more about same donor family linking shortly. So if we switch over to our personal donors, and personal in the sense of someone that you've recruited outside of the clinic, I almost think that there needs to be a whole nother maybe category or angle there of known donors, because I'm aware of people who may have connected with a donor outside of the clinic for the purpose of the donation, but perhaps don't necessarily have a pre-existing relationship with them. But I'm going to focus more so on personal donors, so those who have a connection to you in some way, shape or form, and there has been a discussion around them being a personal donor and then coming through the clinic. Again, my focus is angling through the clinic at this point because that's where my work is. So when we have a pre-existing relationship with someone who's considering donating, it's really important to think about how are we aligned in the way that we consider this donation moving forward. Do we have shared expectations around what this looks like now, but more importantly, what it looks like in the future? And gosh, I think through counselling, we really ask people to forecast and think about the long term, and certainly this lifelong implication that is being created through this connection. And it's really hard to know how that's going to play out. And there's so many variables that go into that. But if you're able to think about those expectations, at least at the start, and feel that sense of, yeah, look, we are really aligned in what we hope this looks like in terms of roles that a donor may have in our life and in our children's lives or child's life, how they will be known to a child, how willing they are to share information or not, how they're talking to their own children if they have children about this, and how our children will be connected or will understand the relationship to which they share. Or actually, gosh, are we really not aligned? And there's so many differences in how we're presenting with this that might raise some red flags. Again, if it's someone that you have a relationship with, some of the the positives can be, we know who this person is. There is a certainty here. This is a tangible human that we know about. We can maybe potentially feel that it's easier to connect with over the course of your child's life, and for a child to have access to them and understand them and their whakapapa, their connection to their wider whānau. But also one of the things you might consider is, how does this donation change the dynamic that we currently have? Is the potential for conflict here where this dynamic all of a sudden feels a bit messy, or we don't really know how to interact with each other due to the changing nature of this lifelong connection that's been created? How might we manage conflict if there were challenges around information sharing or expectations and roles? And one of the things that we will talk about in counselling when someone is moving forward with a personal donor is all of those implications. How will we navigate conflict? Have you had conversations about how this is discussed more broadly? How are people talking to future children about this, etc.? And then also when expectations or circumstances completely change. And again, that uncertainty of we don't know exactly what the future looks like. What would it be like for one party to move to another country or drastically change what their lifestyle is and have less contact than what was expected, etc.? How do we manage the uncertainty that goes with this, even when there are these conversations early and upfront? So as you can see, there are these really distinct differences and different implications that it's really important to consider when you're thinking about choosing a donor. And if I bring that conversation back to taking the perspective of a child when you're considering a donor that makes sense to you and feels appropriate for you, what's in the best interest of a future child? It's sometimes hard to have that perspective, I realize, at the beginning of this process. And gosh, again, if we think about that concept of forecasting even beyond a child, but actually a donor conceived person throughout the whole course of their life, which I'll talk about shortly. Coming through the clinics, I know one of the big things that people talk about are wait times, and I'm a little cautious of talking about them here because I don't want to set unrealistic expectations. I know that this has been recorded and this is likely to change over time. So what stands now might not stand in the future. And also, again, I can only talk to the clinic that I'm based at currently. My understanding is that at FA right now, to use a clinic donor, or to access a clinic donor, I should say, if you were doing IVF treatment, there isn't a considerable wait time, and that's very different to how things have been even a year or maybe a couple of years ago. If we think back to COVID times, there was a considerable wait. And I think that in itself actually really changed the implications for people and decision making around what made sense in their pathway, because there's so many other factors I know that need to be considered in terms of timeframes in people's lives. But a donor who's coming through the clinic will complete a workup in the same way that a personal donor will. So clinic donors, personal donor, same process. So providing background information, lifestyle declaration, semen analysis, infectious disease screening, genetic screening with expanded carrier testing for over 500 genetic recessive conditions, police vetting at the start of their process, so at one time only. They'll undergo a medical consultation with one of the fertility specialists who takes a health history, a family health history going back 4 generations. They will undergo counselling, so 2 counselling sessions where the focus is really on understanding the long-term implications of becoming a donor. So discussing a donor's personal history, social circumstance, mental health history, motivation for donating. Why is this important? What does this mean to you? What's brought this up for you now? And many different reasons that present with that question. What does it mean to have a genetic connection to another family, potentially 7 other families, but not necessarily have a social connection in the same way that you do with your own family? How are you talking to your whānau about this? If a donor has a partner, their partner very much has to be a part of this process, and certainly be at counselling to understand the wider, I often talk about these far-reaching tentacles that are created with donation. So the importance of a whole family really understanding what it means for someone to donate gametes, eggs or sperm, How are they going to support their own children to understand the decision that they've made to donate, and that their children will have half genetic siblings in these other families that have accessed their donation, and the importance of their children understanding that for many reasons. But one notable one is their right to know. So our donors provide obviously health information and considerable health information that is self-report. This health information, I would talk about it having a three-pronged purpose, really. So one is that, look, there may be certain things that rule them out of being a donor, maybe that this isn't actually going to be an appropriate pathway for them. One is for our recipients to be able to access that information and potentially choose a donor. But the most important one actually is for donor-conceived people to then have that record throughout their life and to have a full understanding of their health history on both sides of their genetic makeup, and have the same right as someone who is non-donor conceived. So when you're looking to choose your donor, if it was a clinic donor, you would be provided with a self-report profile that the donor has put together. That's based on a template where they ask specific questions, including around their motivation to donate, their expectations or hopes for future contact, openness to future contact and what that looks like, personality questions, details about their characteristics, hobbies, interests, background, subjects at school, favourite subjects, how they feel about animals, to give a flavour of who they are, alongside a copy of their genetic results and a medical summary, and any police vetting information. So it's not a huge amount of information that's received, but that information is also exactly the same as what would be for personal donors. And again, the big reason for that is because this is actually for a donor-conceived person, not simply the recipient who may be choosing that donor. Okay, I'm not going to talk a huge amount around embryo donation because it deserves a whole piece to itself, and also using donated eggs in conjunction with donated sperm. But I do understand it's a pathway that some people are exploring more than ever. So look, this is an option. In New Zealand, accessing embryo donation, there is a requirement that it has been considered your best or only option of having a child by your medical specialist. And one of the things I think it's important to know with embryo donation, I think there's sometimes this expectation that actually there's this huge bank of embryos that people might be able to access. That's not the case. It is not hugely common. And while some people are certainly interested in donating their embryos for a variety of reasons, it is a complex process that we align very closely with adoption, part of that being that oftentimes a child born from embryo donation will be a full genetic sibling to a child from the donor family. So there is a complexity there that certainly requires lots of attention to detail, a huge amount of counselling, and it is an ECAT process. By ECAT, some of you may not be familiar with ECAT, but ECAT are the Ethics Committee for Assisted Reproductive Technology, and they are appointed by the Minister of Health to oversee certain cases that are considered non-established procedures, embryo donation being one of those. The other area is donated eggs in conjunction with donated sperm. Again, this is a case that would be required to go through ECAT. So raising a child, having a child that you don't share a genetic connection with on either side, and then a connection between two separate donors, whether they be personal donors or clinic donors. And there are different considerations with this, which is why I've kept it as a different slide. One of those being the extended number of genetic connections that should be considered, and what that means for supporting a child to understand those varied genetic connections. So again, the implications of a child being connected to two donors and the same donor families that may be connected to that donor. So a number of things to consider, and I'm really happy to answer questions, whether it's tonight or at another night, around those particular areas. The most important thing of all, of course, is around supporting donor-conceived people. I've put donor-conceived children here, but actually it's donor-conceived people. And this is an area that has been heavily researched and continues to be, and is of immense importance. And as part of our counselling, a significant part of providing support, providing resources to recipient parent who is exploring this option and this pathway to parenthood. And so being able to have conversations around the importance of early disclosure, what that looks like, the emotional responses that will likely present from all parties involved in that, being able to, again, be vulnerable in this space and recognize uncertainty of how do I have this conversation? This is not an area where there is this rule book or necessarily this consistent resource of this is exactly how this goes, but in actual fact there is plenty of support and lots of resources and a huge amount of literature that backs this up. Do we talk about early disclosure? I used to talk about it from prior to the age of 3, and I think my narrative around this has really shifted to actually this is from birth and even preconception in some ways, because I think after talking to donor conceived people more about this, donor conceived adults, that concept of actually for recipient parents, this is around you feeling confidence in developing your story, your way of communicating this origin story to your child and how your family has come about. And so that comes from even before a child is entered into your world, and that they don't maybe potentially remember the first time that this has ever been a part of their life, because it's always been so consistent and they've grown up with this autonomy to speak openly, to share with peers, with teachers, with others, and to be able to have a confidence over what this looks like. And there's often conversations around this being very child-led. And the challenge there is, in order for something to be child-led, we need to support them and provide the safe environment where they feel confident to lead what this looks like. So being able to start this conversation, again, before they've even entered into your world. And I often think recipient parents and our single mothers take on this advocacy or almost educational role sometimes with other adults in their world to be able to say, this is how we talk about our family. And so that there is that consistency there. So supporting children and to have a language, to have an autonomy. But a key part to this is actually recognizing that this needs to consider the needs of donor conceived people across their whole lifespan. And we often have the perspective of a child or a baby, but actually this baby, this pepe, grows into tamariki, who grows into rangatahi, our young people, who grows into an adult, and they are going to connect or disconnect with the story as much as they choose to over the course of their life, depending on their developmental stages. So being able to set the scene and set the environment and allow them to lead it, but you have to provide the resources there at the front end in order for that to happen. There are resources, there's certainly resources available, and that's a big part of our counselling sessions, is being able to provide that and guide people in the direction that is going to allow them to feel a confidence. And options for donor linking and same donor linking with siblings. And so this generally happens, certainly if you have worked with a donor through the clinic, can happen in one of 2 places, but certainly through the clinic or through the government register, which I've not talked about today because I didn't talk about the legislation. And there are various options around that, and it's something that's under review at the moment. And there is a new platform coming out in order to provide maybe a more robust service around donor conception linking, so connecting with donors and same donor families if your donor has donated to multiple families, as I said, potentially up to 7, and that can be done by contacting your clinic. Oh, and then I got to the end of my bit that came about abruptly. I'm going to hand over to Rochelle now. Thank you, guys.
Sorry. I think there was a small technical difficulty. First time on a webinar, so I kind of expected to be looking at a sea of faces, not just my own. So thanks, Andy, for sharing that first part with us. Now I am going to introduce Caroline. So hopefully she's going to pop up on the screen anytime. And we're going to talk a little bit about what to do if you decide that you want to use someone other than a clinic-sourced donor. So when I, just briefly, when I did my research, which I did in about 2018, I interviewed a number of different women who had opted to become single mums by choice. And in those days, which is probably only 7 years ago, but, you know, most of them had probably used clinic donors, but there were a few that had used private donors. And I think the main way women found donors in those days, if they wanted to use someone other than a clinic donor, was to probably email out to their group friends and kind of extend this invitation to see if anyone wanted to become a donor for them. So that was a probably more common route, whereas now I feel like we've got a multitude of options. But I'm going to pass over to Caroline, and I might just mute myself. Caroline, welcome. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. I wonder if you're happy just to kind of talk to kind of how this journey has been for you.
Yep, not a problem. Thanks, Rochelle. I am 38 something weeks pregnant with a donor baby. I have a nearly 5-year-old from a previous relationship. And that sort of dictated that going down the donor pathway was the road I wanted to go down for just to have another baby and finish our family. Having always wanted more than one child, but life happened and things went a bit differently. So I initially, prior to my daughter being born, I initially got in touch with Fertility Associates and went on the waiting list there to wait for a donor through IUI, and never really got anywhere through a variety of factors. It was a combination of long waiting lists. I ended up then meeting a partner, having my daughter, then COVID hit, then life happened. So it all just sort of went a different way after that. And I then started looking into known donors. I initially sort of jumped into the Facebook pages with sort of dedicated to finding sperm donors, and found that quite a minefield. I'd done quite a lot of research. I continued doing quite a lot of research around not only the logistics, but also the legalities around donor conception and sort of the things that needed to be watched out for in bits and pieces. And I very quickly found that while there were some genuine people on those Facebook pages, most of them were spread around the country, and the logistics of trying to time cycles and time travel and fit in work and parenting around that was actually just a little bit too hard. So I then started narrowing it down and saying it had to be someone relatively local. And then discovered that there's also a lot of serial donors on those groups, which I was very keen to avoid, just with the complications of the morality side of that, of not wanting to have 100 siblings spread throughout the world. And there were also quite a few creepy men, for lack of a better word, who were in it for goodness knows what intentions. So I gave up on that probably 6 months into sort of actively trying to find someone through that group. And I put my big girl pants on and put it out to my own Facebook friends. And just sort of put a post out saying, hey, this is what I'm after, this is what I'm looking for. Bit of a out there request, but if you know anyone, get in touch and let's have a chat. And at that point, a family friend came forward and said, hey, I know someone who could be interested, keen to have a chat, keen to get together and do some talking. And that ended up being the way we went. So I met up with both family friend and my donor, and we talked through lots. We had probably 3 or 4 meetings where all we just did was get to know each other, talk through things, ask questions, think things through, make sure that everyone was sort of happy with where things were going. So we had a lot of discussions around putting together an agreement, so making sure that we were both happy with both sides of sort of the logistics of the whole insemination process, that it was to be AI, how that was going to work, just the nuts and bolts, really. And I found the Hapu Helpers website was really helpful at that point. They had lots of really helpful articles, and I ended up ordering a kit off them with the various bits and pieces that were needed. Then we also talked about family history, health conditions, anything genetic that might come up, lifestyle factors, all that sort of thing, just to make sure that there was as much compatibility there as what you'd get without going to the lengths of DNA testing and genetic testing and all that sort of thing. Sort of probably the length you'd go to with a potential partner, but possibly a little bit more because there wasn't that intimate connection that you would have with a partner. We talked about contact afterwards. So his request was that he has a couple grown children, and he would like for those children to know if and when there is another half sibling floating around, which is perfectly logical and reasonable. And then we just talked about sort of going forward, should a child be conceived, what are we both wanting, and put that into an agreement, which we then had witnessed by a third party. So I didn't get lawyers or anyone else involved, but just that sort of that trusting connection. And I'd had 4 years going through family court at that point to know quite a lot about guardianship and parental rights and all that sort of thing. So I had all that in the back of my head. And it was both covering myself so that I'm not dragged through that process again, but also him covering himself of he doesn't want to be involved and start over with another new family. So making sure that we're covering all the bases there. And then from there it was, sign an agreement and start timing ovulation cycles, and took probably 8 to 10 cycles. We initially lived about an hour and 40 minutes apart, which made things quite hard. I then ended up moving for a job closer into town. We were in a really rurally isolated place. So we moved into town and ended up 25 minutes away from each other. We were just about to move into a new build house. And I'd sort of made the call that, hey, I've been trying for a little while. We've had a good couple of goes. I'll give it 3 more cycles. And if it doesn't work, before we move house, we'll get rid of all the baby gear, and whatever will be, will be. And lo and behold, next cycle was the lucky one. So yeah, big long process, and in some senses only just starting. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's where we've been and where we're headed.
Thanks so much, Caroline. I think that's really nice, a nice kind of story around, kind of how you went about this journey. I've just got one kind of question around what do you think his motivation was for wanting to donate?
Yeah. So that came about in our conversations with the mutual friend, that she'd had similar desires when she was younger, that she'd ended up having, can't remember whether she's got one child or more, but ended up with that same sort of scenario of having chosen a not ideal partner. And if she could go back and do it again, she would go down that donor pathway. But at the time, it wasn't really a thing. So that discussion had come up, and my donor sort of went, "Oh, well, yeah, I'd love to be able to do that for someone." So it was a real genuine, just out of the goodness of his heart, doesn't want anything in return. Yeah, just a genuine, I want to do something nice.
Brilliant. Cool. Hey, thank you so much for sharing your story with the group. Really appreciate it. I think we are going to go to questions now. And I'm wondering, Kate, are you able to kind of guide us through this next process, please?
I think hopefully I'm back online now.
Yeah, you're great.
I'm here. I can see some questions in the box here that maybe we can just have a run through. And please feel free to add anything in there as they come up for you guys. I'm just going to check who might be best to answer some of these questions. Apologies while I go through them. Is there any verification of what information the donors provide in terms of the questionnaire? I'm assuming most people are honest, though. Thank you for putting that through. I'm picking that might be related to maybe donors coming through the clinic, but apologies if I've got that wrong, because I think Caroline's so helpful to hear your story and the process that you went through with your donor and those conversations and gathering information and the agreement that you put together. In terms of the information that the donors are providing through the clinic, verification, no. And I think what you may be alluding to there is their GP notes that are requested, and that is not the case. So the profile that is put together is a self-report profile that the donors create, that is read by a medical director, by a counsellor, the doctor can see that, and also the donor team. But other than that, it's not verified by anybody else. Other questionnaires, so the lifestyle declaration, no, not to my knowledge verified by anyone else. The police vetting obviously is something that's sent off externally, so I guess that is verified, but it happens one moment in time. If there were criminal actions following that, we wouldn't necessarily be made aware unless they alerted us or someone else alerted us. So hopefully that answers your question around that one. What conversations would a donor mother need to have with a donor, and what age would this be recommended if there is an age? Rochelle, I'm not sure if that's something that you want to, I think that is alluding to a recipient of donation and the timing of having a conversation with a donor, maybe. Oh, perhaps actually, maybe that is more coming through the clinic, do you think? I'm wondering if that question is about donor linking, but apologies if I've got this wrong. So I think if I read it correctly, it's at what point might a recipient choose to connect with, to link with their donor. And look, actually that's an area that's been heavily researched as well. And there's been some fantastic work come out of a recent New Zealand project called Diane's, which has looked at various things. And one of those areas is going to be early donor linking experiences as well. there is massive variation there. And so where the legislation stands, and so the legislation that I'm referring to is the HEART Act, so the Human Assisted Reproductive Technologies Act, which came into New Zealand in 2004, came into play in 2004. And one of the things that stipulates is that people can access the identity of their donor from the time a child is born. So a recipient can access that information either through the clinics or through the donor register, which sits with the Registrar General of Births, Deaths of Marriages. And a donor conceived person could access that information autonomously from the age of 18, should they not have already been provided that information by their parents. So in theory, people can access that information as early as birth, or that's when the information is registered. And we see lots of different variation in that. What I can say is my understanding is that there is a trend towards earlier linking than ever before. And I think there are probably different reasons for that. But some of the anecdotal conversations that I've had with people who are engaging in linking, and that linking, again, may look very different for different people. So just reaching out to a donor to make contact, send a message, send an update, ask questions, or request contact. But it may be to set up what feels like a healthy platform for their child to understand who that person is in the future. It may be that they want to establish an early relationship. The donor is under no obligation to obviously have contact. There's certainly the identifying information needs to be released if it was requested, but it's up to them to choose how they might respond to that. So I think I'm getting off track a little bit with that question. Lots of variation. I don't know that there's necessarily a right or wrong when linking happens, and there's a whole lot of personal choice and a number of factors that would probably go into that. However, my strong recommendation is actually accessing guidance and support before starting linking. I heavily recommend connecting with a fertility counsellor, whether that's through the clinic or there are external fertility counsellors like Rochelle here, who specialises in reproduction and very experienced in donor conception, to think about your expectations of what that linking experience may be. Meeting a donor who you've never met before, you may have developed your own expectations of who they are or what that connection may feel like, which may be very different to the reality. So there's a whole lot to consider there. So yeah, strongly recommend accessing support before starting, whenever it is. Yeah, I'm just going through the list. Apologies, guys. Rochelle, can you see any of those other questions there?
Oh, yes. Now I've just got one come through. Do you get support throughout the pregnancy with FA? Definitely an Andy question.
Oh, that's I didn't even spot that one. Apologies. Yes. Through a pregnancy. Apologies. Yes, sort of. So this is a really important question. And it's an area that has been a focus for us recently, and that a huge emphasis, of course, is on preconception. So all the counselling that you undertake, 2 counselling sessions nowadays, is at a time when people are often in a really contemplative space, or may have made the decision to proceed and are choosing a donor. But again, sometimes very difficult to take on the perspective of a child and what that may feel like and all the emotions that come with that, and mentally preparing for what does it mean to support a donor-conceived child in their knowledge in connecting with other donor-conceived children or sibling linking, etc. And so something that has been in sort of development, certainly in conversations, is the development of a recipient education series that happens post-conception, looking at about ideally 1 to 2 years, where people can connect together, find your community, but also have the opportunity to share information, guidance, extra support. So that's not necessarily through a pregnancy itself. That's not to say that people couldn't access support. And again, my recommendation would be talking to someone who has experience in this area. So whether that's through the clinic or one of our external professionals, and we have a whole list of professionals that we would offer to people, because it's important that you connect with someone who feels right to you. So not specifically, but it's certainly available.
And I guess I would just add to that I guess the Facebook group really does, when I talk about the Facebook group, the Fertility New Zealand Facebook group, the Single Mothers by Choice, all of you will be on now because you're attending this webinar. And we're by no means the only Facebook group that cater for the group, but there's just so many women who are willing to share their stories and their experiences. So it's a really supportive community, and we have been meeting monthly online, either online or alternating in Auckland, where we do meet up at a cafe. There's also the Christchurch group, and there are women scattered across New Zealand. I'm aware that there may be women from other places in New Zealand, obviously, that could connect as well through the group, because it's always nice meeting in person, a little bit old-fashioned like that. So I do think, when I had my son in Australia, and when I first came back to New Zealand, one of the first things I did was connect through Fertility New Zealand, and 10 of us showed up at this meetup. And of those women, kind of 3 to 4 of us went on to meet very regularly for Friday night wines, and 2 of those women are now 2 of my very close friends, and their sons are now growing up with my son, and they're like the brothers that he has never had. So, I really think there's something quite special and unique about being a single mother by choice, and that those connections that you form can be a really important part of the journey and the journey for your child. Really normalizing this as so that it feels kind of a normal part of their identity as well.
I can see another question in there is someone who has their first clinic appointment coming up, and what to expect to happen from this appointment. I'm going to assume that is around your first medical appointment with your fertility specialist, as opposed to a counselling appointment. I'm probably not actually the best person to ask around that, but that will be focused on your fertility. So being able to talk to your specialist about what options are available. So they might talk about different treatment pathways, if it is that that's what you're wanting to do in terms of IUI or IVF, and provide details around what those treatment pathways look like, but also around any test results that you have relating to your own fertility, and then guidance on what the next steps would be if you are looking at moving forward with donor treatment as a single woman. So speaking about how you'd access counselling as your next step, and work with our donor team to support you through the process.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Rochelle. And thank you so much to Caroline as well. I just have some closing comments. There was a couple of questions there about that first doctor's appointment. So glad that you grabbed that at the end. Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to say too that we do have a webinar on our website about what to expect with those first doctor's appointments, and some sort of 101 information around that. So feel free to check that out on our website. And if you can't spot it, then email us on info@fertilitynz.org.nz, and we will send you the link and in the right direction for that. Sorry, just bear with me one moment. I just really want to thank you all for being here tonight, and also all of those in attendance this evening. Really appreciate you giving up your time, and I hope that there's been some really valuable information there for you this evening. Thank you also to Rochelle for talking about our Single Mothers by Choice, both our Facebook community and our support group. We have that support group in both Auckland and Christchurch, and information is on our website, but again, info@fertilitynz.org.nz if you want some help connecting through. And if you don't live in Auckland or Christchurch, don't want to do the online thing, then do reach out to us, because we can help connect you with people through our broader Facebook community and our groups, there's ways that we can do that for certain situations, and we're here to help with those kind of things. Caroline, I just want to acknowledge that you are in the latter stages at the moment, and I wish you all the best in these final weeks, and as you meet your new baby soon, all the very best.
Thank you.
Congratulations through this period for you. It's really exciting.
Thank you. Officially on maternity leave as of 3:30. So,
oh, what a feeling! Oh, wonderful. I hope you got your feet up.
If there's anyone in or around Nelson who wants to connect, I'm also more than happy to facilitate that.
Oh, incredible. Just reach out to us at that email address. I'll repeat it again at the very end, and we can help get you in touch with Caroline for that generous offer as well. And our helpline is available on our website. We've got an 0800 number, 0800 333 306, and that email address with any questions that you have along the way also. And do follow us online and keep up to date with our webinar series. And our next one is coming up on the 1st of April and is around age and fertility. And we've got, as mentioned, we've got a library of past webinars on our website, loads of really valuable information on there. And so do have a look and check out our other topics as well. Thank you again so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. And we hope to see you at another webinar in the future. Ka kite.